It's like you are not allowed, if you stand up at any cable channel in the United States and say, wait a second, how did the Ukrainian government throw a U.S. citizen into prison until he died for criticizing the Ukrainian government? And we're paying for that. That's what.
Well, look who we have today. It's our old friend Tucker Carlson, and he is being interviewed by Lex Fridman. Yeah, this interview is a few months old. Still evergreen, though. They're not talking about the election or anything, thank God. Nice change of pace. And Lex Fridman is, they're talking about freedom of speech, basically. Freedom of speech in different countries and what it means, the traditions and all that kind of thing. So let's get into it and see what Tucker Carlson and Lex Fridman have to say.
Oh,
So I think after you did the interview with Putin, you put a clip, I think on TCN, where like your sort of analysis afterwards.
yeah, it wasn't much of an analysis.
No, but what stood out to me is you were kind of talking shit about Putin a little bit. Like you were criticizing him.
Why wouldn't I?
It spoke to the thing that you mentioned, which is you weren't afraid. Now the question I want to ask is, it would be pretty badass if you went to the supermarket and made the point you were making, but also criticized Putin, right? Criticize that there is a lack of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and
In the supermarket?
yes.
Oh, you mean if I also said that? Well, yeah, I mean, of course I think that. I'm not. So I guess part of it is that I'm a little, because I have such a low opinion of the commentariat in the United States and the news organizations, which really do just work for the U.S. government. I mean, I really see them as I did Izvestia and Pravda in the 80s. Like, they're just organs of the government, and I think they're contemptible. And I think the people who work there are contemptible, and I say that as someone who knows them really well personally. I think they're disgusting. That I'm a little bit cut off, kind of, from what people are saying about me because I'm not interested. But so I try not to be defensive. Like, see, I'm not a tool of Putin. But the idea that I'd be flacking for Putin when, my relatives fought in the Revolutionary War, like I'm as American as you could be, it's like crazy to me. Ann Applebaum calls me a traitor to my, okay, right. It's just like so dumb. But no, of course.
Imagine meeting somebody like Tucker Carlson and having all of these establishment hacks calling you a traitor because you went and interviewed Vladimir Putin. There was a time in this country, I remember, I'm old enough to remember that, when, of course, notable journalists would go and interview world leaders of all kinds. It didn't matter who they were, the most kindly ones and the most, the most beneficent ones, the most democratic ones, if you like, as well as the biggest tyrants. I mean, that is the job of journalists, isn't it? And nobody would say, oh, you talked to, whoever the current Soviet premier was at the time, or the current Chinese premier. You talked to them? Wow, you must be a traitor to our country. The whole thing is just ludicrous. After Tucker Carlson had that interview with Putin, it was just, I didn't even watch the interview. I haven't watched it yet. I heard Putin started with like a 45-minute lecture on Russian history or something like that. And, Russian-Ukraine history, I guess, to set the context. With Tucker Carlson practically falling asleep with his eyes glazing over. And, of course, I heard about Tucker visiting a big supermarket there and being apparently blown away by the system of putting a coin in and getting your shopping trolley and taking it inside. Apparently he doesn't do his own shopping much, so he's probably a bit out of touch. And apparently he was blown away by the metro stations, but apparently everybody's blown away by the metro stations in Moscow. So, yeah, but watching those hacks just lay into Tucker Carlson just goes to show, some people, they just have all the right enemies. Trump is one of those people, and Tucker Carlson too, regardless of what you think of Tucker Carlson personally. I quite like him. I think his show on Fox was hilarious. The writing on it was often fantastic, very based, really dancing near the edge a lot. But you can, he has all the right enemies. Anyway, let's see where this conversation goes.
Of course they don't have, no country has freedom of speech other than us. Canada doesn't have it. Great Britain definitely doesn't have it. France, Netherlands, these are countries I spend a lot of time in. And Russia certainly doesn't have it. So that's why I don't live there. I'm just saying our sanctions don't work. That's all I was saying. And we don't have to live like animals. We can live with dignity. Even the Russians can do it. That's kind of what I was saying. Even the Russians under Vladimir freaking Putin can live like this. And no, it's not a feature of dictatorship. That's the most, I think, discouraging and most dishonest line by people like Jon Stewart, who really are trying to prepare the population for accepting a lot less. He is really a tool of the regime in a sinister way.
That's actually a pretty interesting point you just said there. He's one of the tools, Jon Stewart is one of the tools, amongst many others, trying to prepare the population to accept a much lesser life, to prepare for a much more reduced life, less freedom. And this is something that's been going on for decades, of course, but it seems to be intensifying. It seems to be intensifying in recent, over the last 10 years. But it's just tightening and tightening. The frog is in the pot, slowly getting boiled. It's not boiling yet, but the temperature is rising. Very good point.
Always has been. Like, how dare you expect that? What are you, a Stalinist? It's like, no. I'm an American. I'm like a decent person. I just want to be able to walk to the grocery store without being murdered. Is that too much to ask? Shut up, then you don't believe in freedom. It's really dark if you think about it,
So there is a fundamental way which you wanted Americans to expect more.
You don't have to live like this. We don't have to live like this. You don't have to accept it. You don't. And everyone's afraid in this country they're going to be shut down by the tech oligarchs or have the FBI show up at their houses or go to jail. And people are legit afraid of that in the United States. And my feeling is, so? Like, show a little courage. Like, what is it worth to you for your grandchildren to live in a free, prosperous country? It should be worth more than your comfort. That's how I feel.
We should make clear that, by many measures, you look at the World Press Freedom Index, you're right, U.S. is not at the top. Norway is. U.S. scores 71, same as Gambia,
really?
West Africa.
So let me just ask.
Hold on a second.
Now you're making me laugh.
Ukraine is 61, and Russia is 35. The lower it is, the worse. Close to China at 23 and North Korea at the very bottom, 22.
Didn't Ukraine put Gonzalo Lira in jail till he died for criticizing the government? How can they have a high press?
Yes, that's why they're 61.
But I'm saying, look,
I
I don't know what the criteria are they're using to arrive at that. But I know press freedom when I see it. I try to practice it, which is saying what you think is true, correcting yourself when you've been shown to be wrong, as I have many times, being as honest as you can be all the time, and not being afraid. And those are wholly absent in my country, wholly absent. People are afraid in the news business. I would know, since I spent my life working there. And they're afraid to tell the truth. They're under an enormous amount of pressure, and a lot of them have little kids and mortgages. I've been there. So I have sympathy, but they go along with things like you are not allowed. If you stand up at any cable channel in the United States and say, wait a second, how did the Ukrainian government throw a U.S. citizen into prison until he died for criticizing the Ukrainian government, and we're paying for that? That's why it's offensive to me. We're paying for it. And that happens all the time around the world, of course. But this is a U.S. citizen, and we're paying the pensions of Ukrainian bureaucrats. Like, we are the Ukrainian government at this point. And like, if you said that on TV, on any channel, well, you'd lose your job for that. So like, that's not, I don't care. Or Norway is at the top. Really, Norway. If I went on Norwegian television and said NATO blew up Nord Stream, which it did. NATO blew up Nord Stream. The United States government, with the help of other governments, committed the largest act of industrial terrorism in history. And by the way, the largest environmental crime, the largest emission of CO2, methane. Could I keep my job? No. So how is...
Yeah. Remember before the Russian invasion in February 2022, where every article in the media that ever mentioned Ukraine, it was always to say that the Ukraine was the most corrupt country in Europe, if not the world, that it was a center for human trafficking, that it was an utter shithole, pardon my French. And yeah, there was nothing good said about it, that it was home to sort of neo-Nazis, what are they called, the Azov Battalion, all this sort of stuff. And it's amazing, that the day after Russia invaded Ukraine, suddenly Ukraine was a shining beacon on the hill, a light of democracy in the darkness of the Russian Empire, or on the edge of the Russian Empire. Yeah, remember those days?
Was that a free
Well, we
press?
don't know that. I mean, the whole point of
In
the
Norway?
Yes.
Well, as a Scandinavian, I can tell you they would not put up with that in Norway for a second.
it's
Well,
been a
you're
while.
deviating from the majority? No.
Well, but deviating maybe is frowned upon, but
Frowned upon, yeah.
do you have the freedom to say it if you do deviate? That's the question.
Can you keep your job? That's one
can keep the
measurement
job,
of it.
yeah.
It's not the only measurement. Obviously, being thrown into prison is much worse than losing your job. I've been fired a number of times for saying what I think, by the way. And it's fine. I've enjoyed it. I don't mind being fired. I've always become a better person after it happened. But it is one measurement of freedom. If you have the theoretical right to do something, but no practical ability to do it, do you have the right to do it? And the
Yeah, that's a good question. I would like to see the criteria for this World Press Freedom Index too, actually, to see what it is they consider press freedom. I'm always very suspicious about these sorts of rankings. Amnesty releases rankings like this too on, about prisoners, political prisoners and human rights and all this sort of stuff. I'm always very interested. It can always be interesting to look into the criteria and see what they actually find important and what different criteria get more weighting in their ultimate ranking. But Tucker Carlson makes some good points there. Yeah, sure. We have in the United States. Now, I live in Europe, and I've lived in Europe for decades now. But the United States does have a very robust constitution and Bill of Rights, and freedom of speech is very important. And yes, the government itself is prohibited, from infringing on your freedom of speech. But of course, your freedom of speech does get infringed in other ways, and when huge corporations have immense power over the virtual public square, and when the government contacts these corporations, has backdoors into these corporations, and contacts Twitter, for example, back before Elon Musk took it over, and said, "Oh, we don't like what this account is saying. Can you do something about that?" Or contacted Facebook too, said, "We don't like those, these kind of posts that this person or this group is putting up. Can you do something about that? In other words, can you censor them?" Well, yeah. I mean, there's always some kind of control somewhere. If somebody doesn't like what you're saying, they will, and if they have enough power, they can shut you up, basically, one way or another, or they can make your life hard. Let's put it that way. They can definitely make your life hard. They can censor you, they can get you fired, they can sick the all sorts of NGOs on you, or people like the ADL or other grifters like that on you. All sorts of things can be done. So in some ways, say in Russia, okay, yeah, you can't criticize Putin, or you can't, criticize him in a certain way. They don't have freedom of speech in the way that Americans think of it. But normally, the rules. He says, okay, you can't talk shit about Putin. You can't promote certain ideas, or you can't disparage certain things, certain institutions, like the Orthodox Church, or perhaps Russian government. I don't know. I don't know where the line is in Russia. Same thing in China, for example. You can't disparage the Chinese Communist Party. You can't disparage the leader, Xi, for example, or whoever the leader is. And certain things, you have to stay within the social norms. But everybody knows what they are, as far as I know. Everyone knows. But all the other things, all the other based things in China, you can say some supremely based things about ethnic groups, religious groups. You can say who you think is really running the United States, and you won't have any problem at all. You won't have a single problem. Unlike what you'll have, say, here on YouTube, for example. So it's a balancing act. Now, that doesn't mean, most people probably who grow up in Western Europe or in the United States don't particularly want to live in China. I'm not saying that it's a better place to live. And if it's not your culture and you didn't grow up imbued in it, then you probably don't want to live there. Probably. If you do, fine. But you know what I'm saying. I'm not claiming one place is better than the other. But to claim And certainly Western Europe has nothing like the freedom of speech of the United States even. So there's trade-offs. There's all kinds of trade-offs. Nothing's perfect. There is no utopia. There's trade-offs in every way. But we should know where the rules are. That's the thing. And a lot of those rules are not really rules, or they're unwritten rules, and they're shifting and fluid and in the United States. That's, for me, that's a big problem. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now. Let me know what you thought about this interview, and if you've been listening and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment, hit the like. It all helps me move up in the algorithm, gets my channel some more support, and gets my channel pushed out to more people, which in turn helps me continue making content for you.